Nikola Dimitrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Republic of North Macedonia with us. And he's coming, I feel like the price is right. Come on down. You're the next foreign minister contestant on NATO Engages. Come on down. Yay! Nicola is such a good friend. I knew he wouldn't mind that. And whoops, I think you dropped a card there. Pick that up. No worries. And then we also have Minister Giorgos Katrougalos, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Greece. Welcome, welcome, my friend.
Thank you.
Fantastic to see you.
Good to see you.
I have to say, I've got an unfair advantage. I saw these two at work at the Delphi Economic Forum in February, so you are in for a treat. I'm so excited to talk about something extremely positive and possible. 27 years. We have the Republic of North Macedonia. We have the Greek Parliament ratifying, the first country to ratify North Macedonia as a member of NATO. We've got some more countries to go. So help us understand, and I'm going to ask this question for both of you. And Mr. Minister, I want to start with you. How does the PRESPA agreement really ensure stronger stability and security in the Western Balkans? And Greece has been such a leader in that department.
Because it sends a clear message that we can resolve disputes through dialogue, by good faith, and as my predecessor was saying, using history not as a prison, but as a school. So now, not only we have between the two countries the best ever bilateral relations, but I think that could be a blueprint for the Balkans, the powder keg of Europe in the past, so as to resolve the other very difficult disputes that still exist in our area.
Fantastic. Mr. Minister, what does this mean for your country? Obviously, now, as Minister Milkevich said, you know, you were part of the Vilnius 10 15 years ago. Now, today,
Yes.
on that road. What does that mean?
I actually signed the Vilnius Statement back in 2000, and we're the last country that is finally about to join. So this has been a long overdue. We promised then that we will, in solidarity, help each other to make Europe whole and free. And finally, I think we're close to that line of certainty. For us, this is essentially one of the two biggest strategic goals since our independence in '91. In '93, the Parliament said we all together, consensually, we would like to be part of the alliance. We have 84% of our public opinion is in support of this strategic direction. So it really feels special that after all these years, first of all, this is unfinished business. It's good to finish business.
Yes,
and
it is.
I feel privileged to have a finger in making sure that the next generation will have a more reliable, more stable, more predictable country. So we extend the zone of stability in a region that still needs more stability. So it's very special to be part of this process and to build friendship with our neighbors. I don't think there is a more natural state of play than to have the biggest support coming from your neighbors. And as Jens said to the joint session of Congress today, it is good to have friends. So what we did is, by understanding each other, covering the basic interest concerns of the other and respecting the other, we managed to overcome this issue in a way that now we are in the same boat. And we would like to have a great neighbor, and I think they would like to have a prosperous neighbor as well. So this was not easy, and it took leadership of the two PMs to think more about the next generation and less about the next elections.
Well, it was a historic yesterday when Prime Minister Tsipras was in Skopje with businessmen, a huge cabinet, I think 10 members of the cabinet. But, you know, we have some challenges ahead. Immediately, April 21st, presidential elections. We have the European Parliament elections in Greece, and Parliament elections at European Parliament, and then your own national elections very soon. Are you concerned about backlash? Because obviously this is controversial in both of your countries. Not everyone shares your optimism. How do you manage the politics of making sure that there's strong national support for this historic moment?
You are right. It is a great bet. It is not just us. There is a resurgence of nationalism in Europe. And the next European elections are going to take this form of confrontation of two different visions for Europe. Open societies, respect to our values, freedoms, solidarity with the neighbors, and another version, more, let's say, nationalistic in the bad way, the chauvinistic way, that wants the return to a golden past that never existed in Europe. And in our countries, there is still reaction. In Greece, it is very closely associated with the, let's say, wounded pride of the Greeks during the years of the crisis. We lost 1/4 of our national wealth, of our GDP. And some of our sovereignty has been really limited. Now, of course, we have changed page, but a lot of Greeks have an emotional reaction to the agreement. We hope that we are going to persuade them, exactly because, as Nicholas said, the agreement is a win-win bet, not a zero-sum game. We both ensured our vital interests in that. And moreover, we have ensured the perspectives for the future. Cooperation between our enterprises and their enterprises. That summarizes also the ambition we have as Greece for the area. Not just to be a stable democracy, but to export stability as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister. I'm going to turn to you just very briefly. I have another question for you. Because we hope the U.S. Senate will start deliberating the amending the NATO treaty, the ratification process. So I'm going to put you on the spot. And if you were to stand before the Senate and give a 1-minute summary of why North Macedonia should join the alliance, what would you say?
I need to button up.
Okay,
the
stand
Senate.
up, suit up. I'm a senator. Go.
1 minute.
The elevator pitch.
We think that strength is about how strong your military is, how strong your economy is, but also about how many friends you have, how close those friends are, and how willing are they to engage when you need them in times of need. So I think even as a non-NATO member, as a country, as a partner country, we've been part of the burden sharing throughout these years. In Afghanistan, we were at one point the 4th per capita contributing nation. So we carried more than our weight. And I think that willingness to be part of a collective effort, it is what really matters. Then not to forget that the first ever intervention of the alliance was actually in our region in '99. And we provided logistic support for that intervention. And what we make in making North Macedonia more stable is we extend zone of stability in a region that caused NATO to intervene in '99. It will have a calming influence in our neighborhood. Back in Bucharest, we had a defense spending of over 2% of our GDP. Then our previous leadership lost its compass, and they essentially used, George talked about nationalism, I call it shallow nationalism, that is usually self-defeating exactly on the national interests it purports to defend and promote. So it dropped, and now we are committed to bringing it back over 2%, and also making sure that how we spend is worthwhile for the alliance. We talked about the Vilnius statement. It's also an uncompleted story. And I think the enthusiasm I see in the Senate is fully bipartisan, enthusiasm among many allies. And 29 is actually a less stable number than 30.
You were arguing for round numbers?
So
Awesome. I think that works, Mr. Minister. Thank you so
a good
much.
number.
Round numbers.
After this
Round
oration.
numbers. Keep going.
Yeah.
You know, I think what strikes me, even looking back, and I'm thinking about the 2003 Thessaloniki summit, when Greece, using its EU presidency, was saying the work in the Balkans is unfinished and being such a champion. This really brings us forward. What is Greece's future role in securing and stabilizing the Western Balkans? Obviously, the Prespa Agreement is such an important piece, but don't stop there. There's so much more work to be done. We're seeing growing instability in the region.
You're absolutely right. In 2003, we have also put the agenda for the EU enlargement of the Western Balkans. We support that. Greece does not want to become a hegemonic force in Balkans, but we are the oldest NATO, the oldest EU member state. We would like to have an influence positive in developing a common progress and welfare in the region. Already we are among the biggest investors in the Balkans. Despite the crisis, our GDP is still bigger than the aggregate of all the GDP of all the countries' GDP north of our frontiers. So what we want to do to help them catch up with the European acquis, that is, reform their own countries for the interest and benefit of their own peoples. Second, to try to develop the Balkans as a unified economic space. 50 million market, it is a challenge, good challenge for all the countries in the area. So we want to promote political stability, what I said before, exporters of what we have, but also help the neighborhood to catch up with the European average.
Fantastic. I'm going to turn to our audience for any questions with the ministers as you're collecting your thoughts and your questions. I want to talk a little bit about sort of bringing the conversation from the last Russian influence. We saw where there was Russian attempts at influencing the referendum that was held prior to the decision to reach about NATO. We've seen Russian intervention that required the Greek government to expel Russian diplomats. Again, you have important elections. How are you both managing the specter of Russian malign influence within your countries through this very both promising but still very dynamic and challenging political time?
This, as I said, this is about our people. And I'm actually offended when some countries or analysts, they say that we are doing someone else's agenda. This is about making our own country more stable in the company of the countries that care about individual liberties, about the rule of law, and about democratic institutions. That's also strength, how democratic and how functional checks and balances are and institutions are, judiciaries, independence, media freedoms. So we do this for ourselves. We have the full support of our people. 84% of our citizens support us joining NATO. And while back in 2008, for instance, this was not quite an issue for Moscow, it is not a secret that we have had a steady stream of press releases, public statements coming from Moscow saying against the agreement, that this was not, you know, all kinds of criticism. I tell them openly, I speak this publicly and also behind the scenes, this is good for the stability of the region. It is our decision. And at some point, it's going to be a question of leadership and time. We need to talk to each other. And we, the Alliance, as the next 30th member states, I'm hoping I'm going to have that right by December this year to speak also on behalf of the Alliance. And this understanding will have to be, of course, based on some important principles of international law. But we have to engage. And even if we don't improve the relationship, we still need to talk. So I'm going to also mention only one point on the referendum campaign. We don't know where this came from. But I learned this word from digital experts. We had a lot of non-genuine internet traffic in the social media. And the perception in the bubble of the social media, there was a huge gap between the reality on the streets in terms of protests, etc., and the tension and the boycott camp and the euphoria against the agreement in the social media.
I think the French government had a very similar feeling.
So this we noticed. There are some new political players with some Russian flags protesting against the agreement. They're very marginal.
Yep.
So this is what we've seen. But we know where we're going to go. The direction is there, and we are moving in that direction. And this is good. Stability is good for the Balkans. It's good for Europe. And we will continue to convince everyone that this is a good thing.
Mr. Minister, obviously the Greek-Russian relationship has always been one that's very close, particularly under this government, but this was an extraordinary move.
Well, if you look at the map, you can easily see that Greece is a physical bridge between Africa, Asia, and Europe. And it is not just about geography. Our history, never been a colonial power, having an important diaspora in all the neighbor countries that was conducive to peaceful relations, makes us a natural mediator, a political bridge. And we wanted to play this role for our political home, which is European Union, and major countries like China, like the Arab world, also like Russia. But that presupposes mutual respect, respect of the international law, and above all, respect of our sovereignty. When we have been facing a situation in which we consider that there was a breach of our sovereignty, we have indeed expelled Russian diplomats exactly because the relationship of the states must not be based on things like that, but on mutual respect. We still hope, and this is the biggest challenge for NATO and for the European, let's say, defense and security in general, that we could reintroduce Russia in the European system of regional security. If we manage to do that with Soviet Union through the Helsinki Agreement, having a much more aggressive, much stronger, let's say, challenge, why not to become possible with Russia as well? Of course, I'm repeating the obvious, having as precondition full respect of international law and lack of any kind of aggression.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a few more minutes. Questions from the audience? Yes, Ambassador Sandy Vershbow.
Sandy Vershbow at the Atlantic Council, former NATO Deputy Secretary General. Congratulations to both ministers and to your countries for solving what seemed to many of us to be an insoluble problem, but where there's a will, there's a way. But looking ahead, migration continues to be a major challenge facing Europe, and it seems that the EU is becoming more and more divided on the subject with the decision to scale back Operation Sophia. I'd ask the Minister from Greece in particular, what would be your recommendation as to the future NATO role in maritime security, and in particular how to help keep a lid on the illegal migration problem?
Thank you. It's really a very pertinent question. NATO could help, and it helps, but it is above all a European problem. There is not any nation that can resolve this issue by itself. We, as Greece, we faced a perfect storm of crisis, economic combined with migration. But we still remembered the time that we have been migrants and refugees. So our reaction was very natural. We opened our country to those in need. Other countries in the European Union did not do that. And above all, they did not agree to something which is fundamental in a political union. Sharing of burden, it is a clear sign of solidarity, but speaking about a political union, a political and legal obligation as well. So what it is very, very much urgently needed is a reform of the European legislation, Dublin Treaty, and overall the system of rules we have, so as it is not just the frontline states, countries like Greece, Italy, Spain, to receive the full burden of the migration flows. And above all, and this is a challenge for the West as a whole, to help the countries from which these migrants come to have their own development. Look at Africa. Now we have more births in Africa than in the whole of Asia. If Africa would be a black hole in globalization, every measure that we could take here in Europe or in the States would be futile. So we should also face the root causes of migration, that is unequal economic order globally, a globalization that did not work equally well in some parts of the world, not for the population, also in our countries. This rise of inequalities, both within our states and among our states, is a big threat. So it is not an easy answer to your question, but we must adopt, if we want to be sincere with ourselves, a holistic approach, taking into account all of these dimensions.
Mr. Minister, I'm thinking one of the takeaways that I had from the multiple rounds of NATO enlargement is that there's a sense that after a country enters NATO, the work is done, the mountain has been climbed, and then there's sort of that sense of relief, and sometimes there's a sense of backsliding a little bit. Do you have a plan for the post-membership? What is North Macedonia going to do to continue to do that strong institutional building, to fight corruption, to strengthen North Macedonia to be a strong and stable partner? Do you have a post-membership plan?
I think partly responding, but I will definitely go directly to that question as well. I think what we bring, we have a fresh view of a country that is about to enter. And we know that outside it's cold and you feel lonely. You walk alone. So I think people, countries on the inside, there is a complacency. Because being there for so many years, you forgot how cold it is on the outside. This enthusiasm, I think we would like to spread also among founding members and connect it to the question of migration. We had the war in Syria that we couldn't deal with properly, we the world. And this, I was then based in the Netherlands, and the sense was that this is far and it won't affect us. And then the migration crisis exploded in 2015 and 16. So the world, our world, is getting smaller and it's more interconnected. It requires more joint action. And the responsibility is shared on all of these fronts, the root causes. And we don't have the luxury of not dealing with problems. We need to face problems, invest if we need to invest in more defense spending, because we need strength to have peace, and do things. I don't think we are very experienced in waiting now. We have had 18 map cycles as a country in preparation. I don't think we will take this finally crossing the line, getting the membership for granted. And the actual goal is not to become a formal member. The actual goal is to become a country that has strong, functional democratic institutions, that is a reliable, predictable partner, so that Athens, Washington, D.C., Berlin can reach out to us and say, we need you here and there, in the region, beyond the region. So I think this is the goal. It's not the formal, but it will help to finally get some benefits out of the burden sharing as well. It's a two-way street, of course.
I couldn't find a better way of ending that thought, but I have a recommendation to the conference organizers. I think we need a NATO Engages soundtrack. You've got a friend. You'll never walk alone. I think we have a greatest hits here. But after 27 years, political courage, it can be done. And NATO at 30 sounds really good to me. Please join me in thanking our ministers.
Thank you so much.
You were